Tonight, a woman the entire kingdom once called weak returns, but not to beg forgiveness. She's back to take everything. Lyra Vale, the rejected Luna who vanished on her coronation night, didn't die in exile like they all assumed. She survived. She grew stronger. And now, with secrets that could shatter the throne and power no one saw coming, she's about to remind them all why you should never underestimate someone you threw away. Stay until the end to see how this broken woman becomes the one force even an Alpha King can't control. Drop a comment with your city so I know who's watching, and hit that like button if you love a good revenge story. The Grand Hall of the Silver Peak Kingdom blazed with 1,000 candles, their flames dancing across marble floors polished to mirror shine. Wolves from every corner of the realm had gathered, alphas in ceremonial armor, lunas draped in silk that whispered when they moved, elders whose eyes had seen 5 generations rise and fall. The air hummed with anticipation, thick with expensive perfume and the metallic tang of dominance that always accompanied gatherings of the powerful. At the center of it all stood Orion Kael, Alpha King of the Northern Territories, a man carved from stone and winter itself. His jaw was set, his shoulders squared beneath a cloak of midnight blue that seemed to drink in the light. But his eyes, those storm-gray eyes that had commanded armies and broken rebellions, kept drifting toward the eastern entrance, waiting. She was late. Murmurs rippled through the crowd like wind through tall grass. The bonding ceremony should have begun an hour ago. The moon had already climbed to its peak, full and heavy and watching. This was the night Lyra Vale, daughter of the Western Marches, would be crowned Luna Queen and bound to Orion in front of the entire kingdom. A political alliance, yes, but one that had surprised everyone. Lyra wasn't from a powerful family. She wasn't a warrior or a diplomat. She was ordinary, soft-spoken, the kind of wolf who faded into corners at gatherings like this. "Your Majesty," someone whispered near Orion's shoulder. His second-in-command, Garrett, a wolf with scars that told stories his mouth never would. "The guests are getting restless." "I can see that," Orion said, his voice low and controlled, but there was an edge to it, something sharp underneath. "Should I send someone to—" "No," because Orion had already sent 3 messengers, and none had returned with her. Another 10 minutes crawled by. The whispers grew louder, less discreet. Some wolves weren't even trying to hide their smirks anymore. Orion's grip tightened on the ceremonial blade at his hip, the one that was supposed to draw the binding blood. His wolf prowled beneath his skin, agitated, confused. The mate bond, newly formed, still fragile, felt strange, distant, like trying to hold smoke. Then the eastern doors finally opened, but it wasn't Lyra who entered. It was her younger sister, Mira, clutching something white in her trembling hands. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed. She walked down that long aisle like someone heading to an execution, and the entire hall fell silent. Even the candles seemed to stop flickering. She stopped 10 feet from Orion and held out what she'd been carrying, an envelope, sealed with plain wax. "She asked me to give you this," Mira whispered, and her voice cracked. "I'm so sorry. I tried to stop her, but she's already gone." Orion stared at the envelope like it was a living thing, something poisonous. For a moment, he didn't move. Couldn't move. Then his hand shot out and he tore it from Mira's grip. The room held its breath. He broke the seal, unfolded the single piece of paper inside, and read, "Orion, I can't do this. I won't be what you need, and I refuse to be what they expect. I reject this bond. I reject this crown, and I reject you. Don't look for me. L." The words were simple, clinical, like she was declining a dinner invitation, not destroying a kingdom's future. Orion read it twice, 3 times. The paper crumpled slowly in his fist. "Your Majesty." Garrett's voice seemed to come from very far away. When Orion finally looked up, his expression was carved from ice. "She's gone." The hall erupted, shocked gasps, outraged snarls. Someone's glass shattered against the floor. The elders surged forward, demanding answers, hurling accusations. Political allies who'd traveled for weeks began calculating how this humiliation would shift the power balance. Enemies barely concealed their glee, but Orion heard none of it. Because the bond, that thread of gold and starlight that had connected him to Lyra Vale for exactly 12 days, went dark, not broken, worse, rejected. It withered like a plant ripped from soil, and the sensation drove him to his knees right there in front of everyone. Garrett caught him before he hit the ground completely. "Get him out of here," someone commanded, and suddenly Orion was being hauled through a side door away from the chaos into a cold stone corridor where he could breathe. Except he couldn't breathe. His wolf was howling, clawing, demanding they chase her down and drag her back. But the human part of him, the part that had read those words over and over, knew the truth. She didn't want him. She'd chosen exile over being his Luna, and that realization cut deeper than any blade ever had. 300 miles to the west, Lyra Vale ran. Not in wolf form. She couldn't risk being tracked that way. Just her human legs, a stolen horse, and a bag with 3 changes of clothes and all the money she'd saved over 2 years. The night was cold enough to burn her lungs with every breath, but she didn't slow down. She couldn't, because if she stopped, she'd think. And if she thought, she'd remember the look on Mira's face when Lyra had handed her that letter, the way her sister had begged her to reconsider, the way her father had already sold off her childhood bedroom to pay debts he'd accumulated betting on her success. "You're being selfish," Mira had sobbed. "Do you know what this will do to our family, to the entire Western Marches?" And Lyra had wanted to scream, "Do you know what it will do to me?" Because she'd tried. For 2 months, she'd tried to be what they wanted. Attended the etiquette lessons where elderly Lunas criticized every word she spoke. Endured the preparation rituals where they'd inspected her like livestock, commenting on her hips, her scent, her wolf's bloodline. Smiled through dinners where Orion's advisors spoke about her as if she wasn't even there. "She's adequate," one had said, swirling wine in his glass. "Fertile enough, weak-willed enough to be managed." Orion hadn't corrected him. That had been the first crack. The second came during a private dinner, just the two of them, when she'd tried to ask him about his expectations for their partnership. He'd looked at her like she'd spoken a foreign language. "Partnership?" He'd set down his fork. "Lyra, you'll be Luna Queen. You'll manage the household, host gatherings, produce heirs. I'll handle everything else." "So I'm decorative." His brow had furrowed. "You're essential. The kingdom needs stability. This alliance provides that." "And what about what I need?" Silence. Long and telling. "You'll have everything you could want," he'd finally said. "Comfort, protection, status. But not love, not partnership, not even basic respect. Just a title and a cage lined with silk." So she ran. The horse carried her through the night, past sleeping villages and dark forests, until dawn broke gray and unwelcoming. She'd made it to the borderlands, that stretch of wild territory between the kingdom proper and the lawless frontier. Dangerous lands, unclaimed lands, perfect. She sold the horse in a town too small to have a name, just a cluster of buildings around a well. Used the money to buy traveling supplies and a map. The woman who sold it to her, a grizzled wolf with one eye clouded white, had given her a long look. "You running from something or toward something?" "Does it matter?" A raspy laugh. "Out here? Not really. Either way, you'll probably die." Lyra had taken the map without another word. For 6 weeks, she moved deeper into the frontier. The landscape grew harsher, less forgiving. Towns became outposts. Outposts became camps. Camps became nothing but animal trails and survival. She learned quickly, or she didn't eat, learned to set snares, to find water, to sleep with one eye open because the things that hunted in these woods didn't respect borders or bloodlines. She was robbed twice. The first time she'd frozen, let them take everything. The second time, something in her snapped, and she'd fought back with a ferocity that surprised them both. She'd lost that fight, got a broken rib and a knife scar across her forearm, but she'd made them work for it. And when they'd finally left her bleeding in the dirt, she'd laughed. Because she was still alive. That became her metric, not comfort, not status, just still breathing. She found work where she could, cleaning weapons for a mercenary camp, hauling water for a mining operation. Once, she spent 3 weeks helping a healer named Kona, who asked no questions and expected no answers. Kona was the one who taught her about the herbs that grew in the shadow valleys, the ones that could hide a wolf's scent or dull the pain of shifting when your body was too tired to do it properly. "You're running from something big," Kona had observed one night, grinding leaves into paste. Lyra hadn't answered. Let me guess. Arranged mating gone wrong? Debt? Murder? Something like that. Kona had nodded, unbothered. Frontier doesn't care about your past. Out here, you're only what you can do right now. That had felt more freeing than anything Lyra had experienced in the so-called civilized world. Winter came hard that first year. She'd found shelter in an abandoned mining cave, deep enough to block the wind, dry enough to survive. Food became scarce. Some nights she went to sleep with her stomach cramping from hunger. Other nights she'd catch something, a rabbit, a bird, and she'd eat it half raw because she was too tired to build a proper fire. Her wolf grew stronger in the deprivation, leaner, meaner. So did she. By the second winter, she'd carved out a real life. Not comfortable, but sustainable. She'd found a valley where a small community of frontier wolves had gathered, all of them running from something, none of them asking questions. They traded skills and watched each other's backs when raiders came through. Lyra learned to fight properly from a scarred female named Tessa, who'd once been a royal guard before she'd killed her commanding officer for putting his hands where they didn't belong. You got potential, Tessa had said after their first sparring session, which Lyra had lost badly. But you fight like someone who's afraid of hurting people. Maybe I am. Then you'll die. Tessa had tossed her a wooden practice blade. Again, and this time actually try to hit me. It took months, but Lyra learned. Learned that mercy was a luxury the frontier couldn't afford. Learned that hesitation got you killed. Learned that the wolves who survived out here weren't the strongest or the fastest. They were the most adaptable. And Lyra adapted. She cut her hair short when it became a liability in fights. Stopped flinching when she had to kill for food. Built calluses on top of calluses until her hands looked nothing like the soft, pampered things that had once worn silk gloves. The bond with Orion, that withered, rejected thing, faded to almost nothing. Sometimes, late at night, she'd feel a distant pull, like someone calling her name from very far away. But she'd learned to ignore it. Whatever he was feeling, whatever he wanted, it wasn't her problem anymore. She'd made her choice. And then, in her third year in the frontier, everything changed. It started with the fever. 3 days of burning so hot she couldn't shift, couldn't eat, could barely think. Kona came to check on her, took one look, and her expression had gone carefully blank. Lyra, when's the last time you had a heat cycle? Lyra had tried to remember. Since the rejection, her cycles had been irregular, almost non-existent. The malnutrition, probably. The stress. She'd been grateful for it. I don't know, a year? Maybe longer? Kona had pulled a vial from her bag, made Lyra drink something that tasted like dirt and metal. Then she'd sat back on her heels, studying Lyra's face. You're pregnant. The word had hung in the air like a blade. That's impossible. There's been no one since. But even as she said it, she knew. The bond, the rejected bond that wasn't quite broken. Somehow, in those brief 12 days between when it formed and when she'd severed it, something had taken root. Impossible or not, you're carrying. Kona had stood, gathering her things. And from the feel of it, more than one. Lyra had stared at the ceiling of her small cabin, processing. She should have felt trapped, terrified. Instead, she felt clear. These weren't Orion's children, not really. He'd never wanted her, not as a partner. This bond had been political convenience, nothing more. Whatever was growing inside her belonged to her alone. Her choice. Her responsibility. Can I hide it? She had asked. For a while. Few months, maybe. After that, Kona had shrugged. Depends on what you're carrying. Regular wolf pups? You'll show like anyone else, but if there's power there, old power, that's harder to conceal. What does that mean? It means some bloodlines carry gifts. Usually skips generations, but sometimes when bonds form and break in unusual ways, it wakes things up. Kona had paused at the door. You might want to find somewhere more remote, just in case. So Lyra had moved deeper into the wilderness, to a place where even the frontier wolves rarely ventured. She'd found a cave system, carved out a den, stockpiled supplies. Prepared to do this alone, because that's what she'd become good at. Being alone. The pregnancy was brutal. Her body, already pushed to its limits by frontier life, struggled with the additional strain. She couldn't hunt as effectively, couldn't fight if raiders came. Tessa checked on her when she could, bringing food and supplies. But Lyra knew she was vulnerable in a way she hadn't been since those first weeks of running. And then, on a night when the moon hung red and heavy, her water broke. Labor lasted 14 hours. 14 hours of pain that made everything else she'd endured feel like practice. Kona stayed with her, along with Tessa, who stood guard at the cave entrance. No pack, no mate, no family, just two frontier wolves helping another survive. When it was over, Lyra lay in blood-soaked blankets, barely conscious, while Kona cleaned off the first pup. "It's a girl," Kona said, and there was something strange in her voice. Then the second pup came. Another girl, and then, impossibly, a third. Boy? Triplets. Lyra had forced herself to sit up, to look at them. Three tiny wolves, already shifting between human and pup form, in that way newborns did before they learned control. They were perfect, healthy, squirming and mewling and utterly dependent. But it was Tessa's reaction that made Lyra's blood run cold. The warrior had stepped into the cave, taken one look at the pups, and gone very still. Lyra, their eyes. Wolf pups were born with blue eyes that changed color as they aged. These three had eyes that gleamed gold. Not yellow, not amber. Pure metallic gold like coins, like firelight, like nothing Lyra had ever seen. "What does that mean?" Lyra had whispered. Kona and Tessa had exchanged a look. "It means," Kona said slowly, "that you need to hide them better than you've ever hidden anything. Because if word gets out that you birthed children with eyes like that, every power-hungry wolf in 3 territories will come for them." "Why?" "Because gold eyes mean alpha potential. Not just any alpha, the kind that comes once in a century, and you've got 3 of them." Lyra had looked down at her children, her daughters Vera and Sasha, her son Dane, and felt something shift in her chest. Not fear. Something fiercer. Let them come. She'd survived rejection, exile, starvation, and violence. She'd become someone who didn't break under pressure, and if anyone tried to take her children, they'd learn exactly how dangerous a mother wolf could be. But Kona was right about one thing. She needed to be smarter. So for the next 4 years, Lyra disappeared completely. She moved every few months, never staying anywhere long enough to form patterns. She taught her children to control their eyes, to dim that golden shine to something more ordinary. She trained them young, too young maybe, but the frontier didn't care about childhood innocence. Vera, the eldest by 3 minutes, had her mother's strategic mind but Orion's ruthlessness. Even at 4 years old, she could track prey through dense forest and never made the same mistake twice. Sasha was wild, unpredictable, the kind of wolf who'd charge a bear just to see what would happen. She had no fear, which terrified Lyra daily. And Dane, her boy, was the quiet one, the observer. He noticed things others missed, the shift in wind direction, the way someone's scent changed when they lied, the patterns in chaos. Together, they were formidable. Separately, they were still just children who needed their mother. Lyra taught them everything she'd learned: how to fight, how to hide, how to survive. But she also taught them things she'd almost forgotten: how to laugh, how to be gentle with each other, how to find joy in small moments. Because even in the brutal frontier, even while running and hiding, they deserved some kind of childhood. She told them stories at night, made-up tales about brave wolves and distant kingdoms, never mentioning that one of those kingdoms was real, that their father was a king who didn't know they existed. Some lies were kinder than truth. On their 4th birthday, Lyra made a mistake. She'd taken them to the small frontier settlement to trade for winter supplies. They'd been careful, kept their hoods up, didn't talk to anyone unnecessary. But Sasha had seen another wolf pup, a little boy playing with a wooden sword, and before Lyra could stop her, she'd run over to join the game. Her hood had fallen back. For just a moment, her eyes had flashed gold in the afternoon sun. Most people wouldn't have noticed. But there was a man there, a trader from the Eastern Territories, and his eyes had gone wide with recognition. Not of Lyra, she'd changed too much, become too hard to recognize, but of what those golden eyes meant. Lyra had grabbed her children and run. They'd made it back to their current den, a cave hidden behind a waterfall, and Lyra had started packing immediately. "Mama, what's wrong?" Vera had asked, her small face creased with worry. We have to move, now. But you said we could stay here until spring. Plans change. They'd made it 3 miles before the hunters caught up. 6 of them. Professional trackers by the look of their gear. They surrounded the small clearing where Lyra had stopped to let the children rest, forming a loose circle with weapons drawn. The leader, a gray-haired wolf with colonel's insignia on his jacket, stepped forward. Lyra Vale, we've been looking for you for a long time. Her blood went cold. They knew her name, which meant this wasn't random. This was targeted. I don't know what you're talking about, she said, positioning herself between the hunters and her children. You've got the wrong wolf, do we? The colonel smiled, and it wasn't friendly. Funny thing, the Alpha King's been searching for his wayward mate for years. Seems the bond, even rejected, gave him just enough of a trace to know you were still alive. And recently he's been feeling something else. Something that shouldn't be possible from a rejected bond. The children. Somehow, Orion had felt them through that withered connection. I rejected that bond, Lyra said, her voice steady despite her racing heart, which means he has no claim to me or anything of mine. Well, that's where you're wrong. The colonel gestured to his men, who tightened their circle. See, a rejected bond still holds legal weight if children result from it, especially if those children display unusual characteristics. Behind her, Lyra heard Dane's sharp intake of breath, felt Vera's small hand grip her jacket. I don't have anything you want, Lyra tried. Again, funny thing, we tracked you from that settlement. My scout says one of your pups has gold eyes. Now, I'm no expert, but I know enough to know what that means. The colonel's smile widened, and I know what they're worth. To the king, maybe. To others. Definitely. Lyra's wolf surged forward, and she had to fight to keep control. You're not taking my children. Wasn't asking permission, the colonel signaled. His hunters moved in, and Lyra discovered something about herself she hadn't known. When it came to her children, she wasn't just dangerous, she was unstoppable. The first hunter to reach for Vera lost 3 fingers before he realized she'd moved. Lyra's blade, the one she'd carried since her 2nd year in the frontier, opened his hand like fruit. He screamed and stumbled back. The second hunter shifted into wolf form, leaping at her from the side. She dropped, rolled, came up with a rock in her free hand and brought it down on his skull with enough force to crack bone. He went down hard. 3 more rushed her at once. She couldn't beat them. Not 3 full-grown warrior wolves, but she didn't need to beat them. She just needed to buy time. Run, she screamed at her children. Now! Vera grabbed her siblings and bolted into the woods. The colonel started after them, but Lyra threw herself at him, tackling him to the ground. They rolled, grappling, his weight and strength overwhelming. He pinned her, his hand around her throat. You were always weak, he snarled. That's what everyone said. Weak little Lyra who couldn't handle being Luna Queen. Lyra's vision started to darken. She clawed at his hand, gasping. But I'll give you credit, the colonel continued. You survived longer than anyone expected. Almost admirable. Almost. Her fingers found something in the dirt, a shard of rock, jagged and sharp. Goodbye, Luna. She drove the rock into his eye. He reared back, howling, and she shoved him off, scrambling to her feet. Blood poured down his face. The other hunters, recovering from her initial assault, charged. Lyra ran, not away from her children, toward them. Following their scent through the forest, her lungs burning, her body screaming. Behind her, the hunters gave chase, and they were faster, stronger, better trained. But she was a mother, and mothers don't give up. She caught up to her children at the river's edge. They'd stopped, cornered by the rushing water, too deep and fast for young pups to cross safely. Mama, Sasha cried. Lyra grabbed them, looked at the water, made a choice. Hold your breath. And she jumped. The current seized them immediately, dragging them downstream in a chaos of white water and rocks. Lyra held her children against her chest, using her body as a shield when they struck stones. Pain exploded through her ribs, her shoulder, her hip. But she didn't let go. She never let go. The river carried them half a mile before spitting them out in a calm pool. Lyra dragged her children to shore, collapsed on the bank, coughing water and blood. Is everyone okay? She gasped. We're okay, Mama, Vera said, checking her siblings with a thoroughness that broke Lyra's heart. So young to be so careful. Lyra forced herself to stand. They weren't safe yet. The hunters would find a way across. But when she looked back, she saw them standing on the opposite bank, watching. The colonel held a cloth to his ruined eye. "This isn't over," he shouted across the water. "The king will know about those children, and when he comes for them himself, there won't be any river to save you." Lyra said nothing, just gathered her children and disappeared into the forest. Because she knew he was right. Orion would come, and when he did, she'd have to make another choice. Run again, or stand and fight. They moved through the night, wet and shivering, Lyra pushing them deeper into territory she'd never explored. Her shoulder screamed with every step, dislocated probably from when they'd hit that boulder in the river. But she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. The children stumbled along behind her, Vera holding Dane's hand while Sasha kept looking back over her shoulder like the hunters might materialize from the darkness. "How much farther?" Dane whispered, his small voice cracking. "Until we're safe." "When's that?" Lyra didn't have an answer. They found shelter in a hollowed-out tree trunk just before dawn, all four of them crammed into a space barely big enough for three. Lyra used her body to block the opening, her knife in one hand, every muscle locked and ready. The children fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted beyond fear. But Lyra stayed awake, listening to the forest, cataloging every sound. Somewhere out there, the colonel was regrouping. And beyond him, farther away but infinitely more dangerous, Orion Kyle now knew she'd survived. Worse, he knew about the children. The bond, that thread she'd thought long dead, pulsed weakly in her chest. Not with emotion, not anymore, but with awareness. He was searching. Actually searching, not just sending people. She could feel his focus like pressure against her skull. By the time the sun rose, Lyra had made a decision. Running wasn't working anymore. Every time they settled, someone found them. Every time she thought they were hidden, the world proved her wrong. She'd spent 4 years reacting, dodging, surviving day to day. But survival wasn't enough anymore. Her children deserved more than constantly looking over their shoulders. They needed to disappear completely. Or she needed to become someone no one would dare hunt. When the children woke, stiff and hungry, Lyra was already packing what little they had. "We're going to the Deadlands," she said. Vera's eyes went wide. Even at 4 years old, she'd heard the stories every frontier wolf had. The Deadlands were the territories beyond the frontier, where even the lawless feared to go. Poisoned water, predators that hunted in organized packs, and worse, rogue wolves who'd given up on civilization entirely and become something else, something feral. "Mama, that's crazy," Vera said, and the fact that a 4-year-old was calling her plan crazy should have given Lyra pause. But she'd run out of safe options. "It's the only place they won't follow," Lyra said. "Not immediately, anyway. We go there, we find shelter, and we wait until they stop looking." "And if they don't stop looking?" Sasha asked. Lyra met her daughter's eyes, still too gold, still too revealing despite all their practice at hiding it. "Then we make them wish they had." The journey took 6 days. 6 days of rationing water and food, of sleeping in shifts, of teaching her children to walk without leaving tracks. Lyra's shoulder didn't heal properly. She couldn't shift to accelerate the process without risking their scent spreading, so she walked with her arm bound tight against her chest, useless and throbbing. On the 3rd day, they passed a frontier outpost. Lyra watched from a distance as wolves traded goods and information. She was tempted to go down, to buy supplies, but the risk was too high. So they kept moving, and that night Dane cried himself to sleep from hunger. "I'm sorry," Lyra whispered, stroking his hair. "I'm so sorry." "It's not your fault," Vera said from her other side, too mature, too understanding. "They're the ones hunting us," but it felt like her fault. Every empty stomach, every frightened whimper, every time her children had to be stronger than children should ever have to be. That was on her. She'd chosen this life when she rejected Orion. She'd gambled that freedom was worth the cost. She just hadn't expected her children to pay it too. The Deadlands announced themselves with silence. The forest sounds, birds, insects, the rustle of small prey, all stopped as if someone had drawn a line in the dirt and declared, nothing good past this point. The trees grew twisted, their bark black and peeling. The ground turned gray and dusty, like ash from a fire that had never quite gone out. "Mama, I don't like this," Sasha whispered, and coming from her most fearless child, That carried weight. "Stay close," Lyra said. "Don't touch anything. Don't drink any water we find. If I say run, you run, and don't look back." They moved through the dead forest for hours, seeing no one, hearing nothing. It was worse than danger. It was absence. Like the land itself had given up. Then they found the settlement. It wasn't on any map Lyra had ever seen. Just a cluster of structures built from scavenged materials. Sheet metal, old wood, stone stacked without mortar. Smoke rose from a central fire pit, and around it sat maybe 30 wolves in various states of decay. Not physically dying, but eroded. Like they'd been out here so long they'd forgotten what it meant to be civilized. Lyra almost turned back, but one of the wolves at the fire had spotted them. A woman with gray hair matted into locks, her face scarred beyond recognition. "Well," the woman called out, her voice rough as gravel. "Look what the wind dragged in." The other wolves turned, stared. Lyra felt their eyes calculating, weighing, deciding if she and her children were threats or opportunities. "We're just passing through," Lyra said, keeping her voice neutral. "Nothing passes through the Deadlands," another wolf said, this one male, missing half his teeth. "You either die here or you stay here. That's the rule." "I don't accept those options," the gray-haired woman laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Got some fight in you? Good. You'll need it." She stood, walked closer, her gait uneven, like one leg didn't quite work. "I'm Rake. This is my pack, such as it is. We don't get many visitors with children." "We're not visitors. We're refugees." "From?" "Does it matter?" Rake studied her for a long moment, then glanced at the children. Her eyes lingered on their faces, and Lyra's hand tightened on her knife. But Rake just nodded slowly. "Keep their hoods up," she said quietly. "Some of the pack here, they'd sell their own mother for the right price. And children with interesting features? That's a price worth considering." So she'd noticed. Of course she had. "We won't be here long," Lyra said. "Where you headed?" "Deeper in." Rake's eyebrows rose. "Deeper in? Girl, this is as deep as it gets before you hit the wastes, and the wastes don't support life. Not any kind worth living, anyway." "Then we'll find another way." Stubborn. Rake seemed to find this amusing. "All right, you can stay the night. Use that shelter there." She pointed to a leaning structure that looked like it might collapse in a strong wind. "And in the morning, you do what you want. But while you're here, you follow our rules. No stealing, no fighting, and you contribute. Hunt, gather, whatever. Everyone earns their keep." Lyra wanted to argue, but the children were swaying on their feet, exhausted beyond measure. "Fine. One night." The shelter was worse inside than it looked from outside. Dirt floor, holes in the walls, the smell of mildew, and something dead. But it had a roof, and after 6 days of sleeping exposed, that counted for something. Lyra got the children settled, gave them the last of their dried meat, and tried to ignore how Vera divided her portion to share with her siblings. "Get some sleep," Lyra said. "I'll keep watch." "You need sleep too, Mama," Dane said. "I'll sleep when we're safe." "Will we ever be safe?" Sasha asked, and the question hung in the stale air like smoke. Lyra didn't answer, because honestly, she didn't know anymore. While the children slept, Lyra sat in the doorway and watched the settlement. The wolves moved around the fire, talking in low voices, passing a bottle that probably contained something strong enough to forget with. They looked defeated. Not broken, wolves didn't break easily, but worn down to nothing, like stones in a river. Was this her future? Hiding in increasingly desperate places until there was nowhere left to hide? "You got the look," a voice said from behind her. Lyra spun, blade out, before recognizing Rake. The older woman held up her hands, showing she was unarmed. "Easy, just checking on you." "We're fine." "Sure you are." Rake settled against the wall, groaning as her bad leg bent. "That's why you're sitting in a death trap of a shelter in the most hostile territory on the continent, watching your babies sleep like you expect someone to snatch them any second." Lyra said nothing. "So what are you running from?" Rake asked. "And don't say nothing, because wolves don't come to the Deadlands for the scenery. It's complicated. It always is." Rake pulled out a pipe, packed it with something that smelled like burnt herbs, and lit it with a coal from a small tin. "Let me guess. Arranged mating gone wrong? Killed someone important? Debt?" "I rejected an alpha king." Rake choked on her smoke. "You what?" And now he's hunting me, or rather, hunting them. Lyra gestured to the children. They have traits that make them valuable. How valuable? Valuable enough that professional hunters tracked us through 3 territories. Rake whistled low. And you think hiding here will help? I think I'm out of options. Fair enough. Rake smoked in silence for a moment. You know what your problem is? You're playing defense. Running, hiding, reacting. That only works so long before someone faster catches up. So what would you do? Me? I'd stop running. Rake met her eyes. I'd find a way to become too dangerous to hunt, make the cost higher than the reward. I'm one wolf with 3 children and a dislocated shoulder, Lyra said flatly. How exactly do I become dangerous? By being smarter than they expect. See, powerful wolves? They're used to force-solving problems. Someone defies them. They send soldiers. Someone hides. They send hunters. They think in straight lines because they've never had to think any other way. Rake tapped her pipe against her palm. But you survived 4 years in the frontier with babies. That takes cunning, adaptability, things force can't teach. That's not enough against an alpha king. Maybe not directly, but there are other kinds of power in this world. Rake stood, wincing as her leg protested. You want my advice? Stop thinking like prey. Start thinking like a threat. She left before Lyra could respond. The words echoed in Lyra's head long after Rake disappeared into the darkness. Stop thinking like prey. Start thinking like a threat. Easy to say when you weren't responsible for 3 children who needed you to keep them alive. But maybe that was the point. Maybe being responsible for them meant taking bigger risks, not smaller ones. Lyra pulled her knees to her chest, watching the dying firelight flicker across the settlement. Her shoulder throbbed with every heartbeat, a constant reminder of her limitations. She was one wolf, injured, exhausted, running on fumes and desperation. But she'd also survived things that should have killed her. The rejection alone should have driven her mad. Most wolves who lost their mates that way either died or went feral. She'd done neither. She'd adapted, endured, built a life from nothing. That had to count for something. The next morning arrived with shouting that jolted Lyra from the light sleep she'd finally fallen into. She was on her feet instantly, knife drawn, positioning herself between the doorway and her still sleeping children. Outside, the settlement erupted into chaos. Wolves scrambled for weapons, formed defensive positions, their movements practiced in a way that said this wasn't their first attack. Rake appeared in the doorway, breathing hard. Raiders. From the eastern camps. They hit us every few months, take whatever we've managed to scrape together. How many? 15? Maybe 20? Too many for what's left of us. Rake's eyes flicked to the children, then back to Lyra. There's a cash shelter under the main building. Hidden room beneath the floorboards. Get them there. They'll be safe. And you? We fight. It's what we do. She turned to leave, then paused. Though if you felt like helping, we wouldn't refuse. You handled yourself well enough yesterday. Lyra looked at her children, looked at the wolves outside who'd given them shelter without asking for payment or explanation, looked at Rake, who treated her with more respect in 12 hours than the entire royal court had managed in 2 months. Vera, she said quietly, take Sasha and Dane to the cache. Hide until I come get you. Mama, no. That's not a discussion. Vera's jaw clenched, but she nodded. Too smart not to understand, too young to like it. She gathered her siblings and they disappeared toward the main building. Lyra followed Rake into the chaos. The raiders were already visible on the eastern ridge, a dark mass of fur and teeth and violence. They moved with the confidence of wolves who'd never lost a fight, who knew the Deadlanders were too weak and scattered to mount real resistance. What's the plan? Lyra asked, adjusting her grip on her knife despite her useless shoulder. Don't die, Rake said, pulling a wicked curved blade from her belt. Beyond that, we improvise. The raiders hit like an avalanche. No warning, no negotiation, just pure predatory aggression. They crashed into the defensive line, scattering wolves who were already malnourished and exhausted. The settlement's fighters tried to hold, but they were outmatched in every way that mattered. Lyra met the first raider head-on, a large gray male, scarred and overconfident, probably expecting her to run or cower. Instead, she dropped low, sliding under his leap, and opened his belly with her blade as he passed overhead. He hit the ground in a spray of blood and shock, his howl cutting short as his own momentum finished what her knife had started. The second raider learned from the first mistake, came at her from the side, jaws snapping for her throat. She barely twisted away, felt teeth graze her ribs through her torn shirt. Used the momentum to spin, drove her elbow into his spine with everything she had. Something cracked audibly. He yelped and limped away, leg dragging. 3 more circled her now, more cautious. They'd watched their packmates fall. Knew she was dangerous despite the injured shoulder, despite being outnumbered. "She's alone," one snarled to the others. "Just rush her." They did. Lyra couldn't beat 3 full-grown warriors at once. She knew that. Basic math. But she didn't need to beat them. She needed to survive long enough for help to arrive. So she fought the way the frontier had taught her. Dirty, desperate, without honor or hesitation. Went for eyes, throats, anything soft that would slow them down. Took hits that drove the air from her lungs, felt something in her ribs give way with a sickening pop. But she didn't go down. And then Rake was there, her pipe replaced with that curved blade, cutting into the raiders with surgical precision. "Still standing?" she shouted over the chaos. "Still standing," Lyra gasped, tasting copper. Together they drove the 3 raiders back. Around them, the other Deadlanders saw 2 wolves holding their ground and found their own courage buried under the despair. They pushed back harder, made the raiders work for every inch. The tide began to turn, not toward victory, the Deadlanders were still outmatched, but toward something less than total defeat. Then Lyra saw him. The raider leader stood in the center of the settlement, not fighting, just watching. He was massive in wolf form, black fur with a distinctive white patch over one eye. While his pack tore through the settlement, he observed like he was evaluating livestock. His eyes locked on Lyra. Something in his posture shifted. He cocked his head, studying her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. Then he shifted to human form, naked and unconcerned, covered in scars that mapped a lifetime of violence. "You're new," he said, his voice carrying despite the fighting around them. "And you're good. Too good for this trash heap." "Leave," Lyra said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "While you still can." He laughed. "I don't think so. See, I make it my business to know everyone in my territory. And you?" He took a step closer. "You're not Deadland's refuse. You're something else entirely." Another step. "You're running from something big enough to drive you here, to the edge of nowhere." His nostrils flared, scenting the air. "And that makes you very, very interesting." Lyra's grip tightened on her knife. Blood dripped from the blade, mixing with her own blood on the ground. "So here's my offer," the leader continued. "Tell me what you're running from, and I'll tell you exactly how much you're worth. Because in my experience, wolves who run this far are worth a lot to someone. I'm not for sale. Everything's for sale. You just haven't heard the right price yet." He lunged faster than something his size should move. Lyra was already dodging, but her injured shoulder betrayed her, slowed her just enough. His hand locked around her throat, slammed her against the nearest wall hard enough to crack the rotted wood. Her knife clattered to the ground. "Let's see what makes you so special," he murmured, his face inches from hers, his breath hot and rank. Then his eyes went wide. He'd caught it. Beneath the carefully maintained scent mask, beneath the dirt and blood and frontier grime, something else lingered. The faint trace of a bond. Not active, barely there, but unmistakable to someone who knew what to look for. Royal bond. Alpha bond. "No," he breathed, his grip loosening slightly in shock. "You're not just anyone. You're the one. The rejected Luna. The one the Alpha King's been searching." Lyra drove her knee into his groin with every ounce of strength she had left. He released her with a strangled grunt, staggering back. She didn't hesitate. Grabbed her knife, drove it deep into his thigh. Not a killing blow, she needed him alive to call off his pack. "Everyone!" he roared to his raiders, his voice cutting through the battle. "Retreat! Now! Back to camp!" The raiders, trained to obey without question, immediately broke off their attacks and scattered toward the ridge. Within seconds, they were gone, melting into the Deadlands like they'd never been there. The leader limped after them, but not before turning back to Lyra one last time. Blood streamed down his leg from where her blade had bit deep. But his eyes held something worse than pain, triumph. "I know what you are now," he called across the settling dust.
And more importantly, I know what you're carrying. Those children with the golden eyes, the Alpha King will pay a fortune for information on his heirs. His smile was vicious. I'd run faster if I were you, because by tomorrow night, every hunter in 3 territories will know exactly where to find you. Then he was gone, disappearing over the ridge.
Lyra stood in the center of the settlement, breathing hard through damaged ribs, bleeding from a dozen wounds. Around her, the Deadlanders began picking up the pieces, tending wounds, counting losses, salvaging what the raiders hadn't taken. Rake limped over, her bad leg dragging worse than before. What did he mean about the Alpha King's heirs? Lyra looked at the older woman, at the wolves who'd fought beside her without question, at the settlement that had given her shelter, however temporary. He figured out who I am, Lyra said quietly. And tomorrow, maybe the day after, he'll sell that information to whoever pays the most. Then you need to leave. Now. Before what? Before the hunters come? They're already coming. They've always been coming. Lyra wiped blood from her mouth. I'm done running, Rake. That's suicide talking. No, that's reality. Lyra turned toward the main building where her children were hidden. Running only delays the inevitable. And I'm tired of teaching my children to live like fugitives. So what are you going to do? Lyra thought about Rake's words from the night before, about becoming too dangerous to hunt, about thinking like a threat instead of prey. An idea was forming, dangerous and probably insane, but it was an idea. Something stupid, she said. She pulled her children from the cash shelter. They clung to her immediately, asking questions she barely heard. Her mind was already racing ahead, calculating risks, weighing impossible choices. Pack up, she told them. We're leaving. Where are we going? Vera asked, always the practical one. Lyra looked east, toward the frontier, toward the territories beyond, toward the kingdom she'd fled 5 years ago. To see your father. The words tasted like ash, but she meant them. Mama, you said we were hiding from him, Sasha said, confused. We were, but hiding isn't working anymore. Lyra crouched down, meeting their eyes one by one. So we're going to try something different. We're going to negotiate. What if he doesn't want to negotiate? Dane asked quietly. Then we run again. But at least we'll have tried. It was a terrible plan. Probably a death sentence. But it was a plan, and right now, that made it better than what they'd been doing. She thanked Rake, who looked at her like she'd lost her mind but didn't argue, gathered their meager supplies, and started walking. The journey back took longer than the journey out. Lyra's injuries slowed them down, and she couldn't push the children as hard now that they weren't fleeing immediate danger. They moved carefully through the Deadlands, skirting the settlements, avoiding anything that looked like it might have raiders. On the 3rd day, Dane developed a fever. Nothing serious, just exhaustion and stress catching up with a 4-year-old body, but it meant more delays. More time for word to spread. More time for hunters to mobilize. Lyra felt it through the bond, Orion's awareness sharpening, his focus intensifying. He knew she was moving toward him instead of away. She could almost feel his confusion, his suspicion. Good. Let him wonder. Let him worry. By the time they crossed back into frontier territory proper, Lyra had formulated the basics of her approach. She wouldn't beg, wouldn't grovel. She'd offer him what he wanted, acknowledgement of the children, their presence in his life, the continuation of his bloodline, in exchange for what she needed, protection, autonomy, the right to raise them without being decorative. It was transactional, cold. Everything a mate bond was supposed not to be, but they'd never had a real mate bond anyway. Just political convenience interrupted by rejection. Maybe they could build something better from the ruins, or maybe he'd have her executed for desertion and take the children anyway. Either way, she'd know soon. They made camp on the 8th night near the border of the Western Marches, in a small clearing she'd used years ago when she first started running, full circle. The irony wasn't lost on her. She got the children settled, started a small fire, rationed out their remaining food. Dane's fever had broken, but he was still weak. Vera had gone quiet in that way she did when she was processing too much, and Sasha kept looking at Lyra like she expected her mother to disappear. It's going to be okay, Lyra said, though she wasn't sure she believed it. You keep saying that, Sasha replied, but things keep getting worse. Lyra didn't have an answer for that. She heard them before she saw them. Footsteps. Too many. Too organized. Moving in formation through the dark forest. Her hand went to her knife, but she knew it was useless. If this was an attack, they were already surrounded. The soldiers emerged from the darkness like ghosts materializing. 20 of them, maybe more, in full royal armor bearing the king's crest. Professional warriors, each one worth 5 frontier fighters. And at their center, tall and imposing and exactly as she remembered him, stood Orion Kael. He'd aged. Not much. 5 years was nothing to wolves, but there were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. His jaw had hardened, his shoulders had broadened, and there was a weight to him that spoke of years spent searching, years spent with unanswered questions. But his eyes were the same. Storm gray, intense, and locked onto her with a focus that made the bond flare painfully in her chest for the first time in years. "Lyra," he said, and his voice was rough, raw, like he'd screamed her name into the void 1,000 times and never gotten an answer. She stood slowly, positioning herself between him and the children. Her injured shoulder hung useless, her ribs were probably cracked, and she was covered in blood and dirt and the grime of desperate survival. But she stood straight, met his eyes, didn't flinch. "Orion!" The soldiers moved to surround them, weapons ready, but Orion held up one hand and they froze in place. Professional discipline. The kind that came from years of trust. For a long moment, no one spoke. The forest held its breath. Even the fire seemed to stop crackling. Then Orion's eyes shifted, moving past her to the 3 small figures huddled behind her back. To Vera with her 2 serious eyes, to Sasha with her defiant chin, to Dane who was trying very hard not to cry. His expression didn't change, but something in his scent did, shifted, sharpened. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, dangerous in its control. "Are they mine?" Lyra met his eyes and didn't look away. "Biologically? Yes." The word hung in the air like a blade. Around them, the soldiers shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't standard protocol, finding the lost Luna with children the kingdom knew nothing about. One of the younger guards actually took a step back, like he wanted no part of whatever was about to happen. Orion's jaw tightened. Biologically. "You want a different answer, you should have asked a different question. How old are they?" 4. She watched him do the math, saw the exact moment he realized the timeline matched those 12 days between bonding and rejection. His scent spiked with something raw, anger, maybe, or betrayal, or something else she couldn't name. "You knew," he said quietly, too quietly. "You knew you were carrying my children, and you ran anyway." "I didn't know until almost a year later. By then, I'd already made my choice." "Your choice." He took a step closer, and his soldiers tensed, hands moving to weapons. But Orion's focus never wavered from Lyra. "Your choice to abandon your responsibilities. Your choice to let me believe the bond had simply failed. Your choice to hide my heirs in the wilderness like they were something shameful." "They're not your heirs," Lyra said, and her voice cut like winter. "They're mine. I carried them. I birthed them alone in a cave with no pack, no mate, no help except a frontier healer. I fed them, protected them, taught them to survive in a world that wanted them dead. You don't get to show up after 5 years and claim ownership." Orion's eyes flashed gold, his wolf rising. "I am their father. That gives me rights." "Rights?" Lyra's laugh was harsh. "You want to talk about rights? You, who told me to my face that my only purpose was to be decorative and produce heirs. You, whose advisors inspected me like livestock? You think fathering children gives you automatic rights to them?" "I think," Orion said, his voice dropping to something dangerous, "that rejecting our bond doesn't absolve you of the consequences. You made a choice, yes, but choices have repercussions." Behind Lyra, she heard Vera whisper something to her siblings, felt them press closer to her legs. "So what are you proposing?" Lyra asked. "You take them? Lock me up for desertion? Execute me as a traitor?" "I haven't decided yet." The honest brutality of that answer hit harder than any threat. Garrett, Orion's second-in-command, stepped forward carefully. "Your Majesty, perhaps this conversation should continue somewhere more secure. The border isn't safe, And if word spreads that the Luna and your children are here, word has already spread, Lyra interrupted. A raider identified us 3 days ago. By now, every mercenary and bounty hunter in the frontier knows there are royal children with golden eyes hiding in the Deadlands. That got a reaction. The soldiers exchanged looks. Garrett swore under his breath. Golden eyes? Orion repeated. Show him, Lyra said to her children. Vera hesitated, then lifted her head. Let the firelight catch her eyes, pure metallic gold gleaming like coins. Sasha and Dane followed her lead, 3 sets of impossible eyes staring at the Alpha King. The clearing went absolutely silent. That's not possible, one of the soldiers whispered. But Orion said nothing, just stared at his children, children he hadn't known existed until minutes ago, with an expression Lyra couldn't read. Alpha potential, Garrett said quietly. All 3 of them. That's unprecedented. That's a target, Lyra corrected. Every wolf who wants power, who wants leverage over the throne, who wants to breed their own alpha bloodline, they all want these children now. That's why I came back. Not to beg, not to reconcile, but to negotiate protection. Protection. Orion finally tore his gaze from the children to look at her. In exchange for what? Acknowledgement. You claim them publicly as your heirs. You provide security, resources, a safe place for them to grow up. In return, I won't fight your custody claim. They can be part of your world, learn what they need to learn, inherit whatever you want them to inherit. And you? I disappear. Again. Permanently this time. No bond, no claim, no complications. You get your heirs. I get to know they're safe. Everyone wins. It was the deal she'd formulated during the long walk back. Clean, practical. It protected her children while keeping her far away from the cage she'd fled 5 years ago. But Orion was shaking his head before she even finished. No. No? You think I'll let you vanish again? After 5 years of searching, after finding out I have children you hid from me, you think I'll just let you walk away? His voice rose. You rejected our bond, Lyra. Fine. But you don't get to reject your responsibilities as their mother. I'm not rejecting them. I'm trying to protect them. By abandoning them? Again? The words hit like a physical blow. Lyra felt Vera's hand clutch her jacket tighter. I have never abandoned my children, Lyra said, her voice shaking with fury. Everything I've done for 5 years has been for them. Every mile I ran, every fight I survived, every piece of myself I sacrificed, that was all for them. Then prove it. Come back to the kingdom. Be their mother where they'll actually be safe. I can't go back there. You know I can't. Why? Because it's uncomfortable? Because you'll have to attend court functions and smile at people you don't like. Orion's laugh was bitter. Welcome to leadership, Lyra. It's not supposed to be easy. It's not about comfort. It's about survival. The court wanted me gone the first time. What makes you think they'll accept me back? Especially now, with children who prove the bond worked? They'll call me a deserter, a traitor. They'll use my past to undermine anything I try to do. Then we deal with it, together. There is no together. There never was. You made that clear 5 years ago. Orion opened his mouth to respond, but Garrett interrupted. Your Majesty, we have movement on the western ridge, multiple signals. Every soldier immediately shifted into defensive positions, weapons drawn. Orion's hand went to the sword at his hip as he scanned the darkness beyond the firelight. How many? He asked. At least 10, maybe more. Can't tell if they're hostile yet. In the frontier, assume hostile. Orion looked at Lyra. This negotiation isn't over, but right now we need to move. My camp is 2 miles north, fortified position, better defensibility. I'm not going anywhere with you until we have an agreement. Lyra, there are hunters in these woods. I know. I've been evading them for 5 years. Not with my resources, you haven't. Not with 20 royal guards, and... He stopped, scented the air. His expression went cold. Blood. Fresh blood. A lot of it. The smell hit Lyra a second later. Copper and death, carried on the wind from the west. Too much blood for a simple hunt. This was a massacre. Could be the raiders from the Deadlands, Lyra said. They were heading east after I wounded their leader. Or it could be a trap to draw us out, Garrett countered. Standard ambush tactics. Create a distraction, Hit your target when they investigate. Either way, we need to move. Orion gestured to his soldiers. Defensive formation. Civilians in the center. We move north. Double time. We're not your civilians, Lyra started, but Vera tugged her jacket. Mama, I'm scared. And that ended the argument. Because Lyra would swallow her pride, her anger, everything, if it meant keeping her children safe. Fine, but this doesn't mean I agree to anything. Noted. They moved quickly through the dark forest, the royal guards forming a protective circle around Lyra and the children. Orion led from the front, his posture tense, alert. Whatever else he was a good soldier. Lyra could see it in how his men moved with him, practiced, coordinated, trusting. The kind of trust she'd never had with him. They'd covered maybe half a mile when the screaming started. It came from the south, high-pitched and terrified, cutting through the night like a knife. Human screaming. We're close enough. Keep moving, Orion ordered. But two of his soldiers had already stopped, looking back. Sir, that sounds like the merchant camp we passed earlier. There were families there, children. Orion's jaw clenched. We can't help everyone. They're dying, the soldier pressed. Another scream, closer now, and beneath it the sound of wolves snarling, tearing, killing. Lyra knew that sound. She'd heard it in the Deadlands, in the frontier, in every lawless place she'd hidden. The sound of a massacre in progress. How many people in that camp? She asked. Maybe 20, the soldier said. Mostly refugees heading south. So we're just going to let them die? Our priority is securing you and the children, Orion said. I can't risk my soldiers on what? People who need help? Lyra stared at him. This is what you do? This is the great Alpha King everyone fears? You let innocent people get slaughtered because it's inconvenient? That's not fair. Life's not fair. I figured that out 5 years ago. Lyra turned to Vera. Take your siblings, stay with these soldiers. Do not move until I come back. Mama, no. Not a discussion. She looked at Garrett. You protect them. I don't care what happens to me, but if anything happens to them, I will hunt you to the ends of the earth. Then she was running south toward the screaming before anyone could stop her. She heard Orion swearing behind her, heard him ordering his soldiers to maintain position, heard his footsteps pounding after her. Good. Let him come. Let him see what the frontier had made her. The merchant camp was chaos when she arrived. Tents on fire, bodies scattered, and a pack of rogue wolves, 15, maybe 20, tearing through the survivors like they were made of paper. These weren't raiders looking for supplies. This was sport, murder for entertainment. Lyra didn't hesitate, grabbed a fallen sword from a dead guard and threw herself at the nearest wolf. He turned too late, her blade opening his throat. He went down gurgling. The others noticed her then, started to regroup, and Orion crashed into the fight beside her, his own sword already bloody. You're insane, he said, parrying an attack meant for her head. Probably. She ducked under a wolf's leap, hamstrung him on the way past. But at least I'm not a coward. We're going to die here. Then we die doing something that matters. They fought back to back, not because they trusted each other, but because they had no choice. The rogues were vicious, coordinated, clearly experienced fighters. For every one Lyra and Orion dropped, 2 more seemed to appear. But they were making a difference. The survivors, those who could still move, were using the distraction to run, to hide, to escape. That had to count for something. Lyra took a claw across her already injured shoulder and screamed, her vision whiting out with pain. The wolf who'd hit her moved in for the kill, jaws open wide. Orion's sword took his head off. Don't you dare die, Orion snarled at her. I'm not done being angry at you yet. Despite everything, Lyra almost laughed. Then she saw him, the raider leader from the Deadlands, his legs still bandaged from where she'd stabbed him. He stood at the edge of the camp, watching the massacre with satisfaction, and beside him, a figure in a hooded cloak, too well dressed to be frontier trash. Orion, Lyra gasped. That's the one who identified us. He's brought someone. Orion followed her gaze. His entire body went rigid. No, that's not possible. What? Who is it? But before he could answer, the cloaked figure pulled back their hood. It was a woman, beautiful, poised, with silver hair and eyes like ice. She wore the insignia of the royal court on her cloak, high nobility, maybe higher. Orion, she called across the burning camp, her voice clear and commanding. What a pleasant surprise. I was told you were searching the frontier, but I didn't expect to find you here, fighting alongside her. The way she said her made it clear who she meant. Celeste, Orion said, and his voice carried weight. What are you doing here? Oh, I think you know. Celeste smiled, and it was the smile of someone who'd already won. I've been tracking your wayward mate for quite some time. Imagine my delight when I learned she'd produced heirs, golden-eyed heirs, no less. The council will be so interested to hear about this. The council. The royal council that advised the king, that held nearly as much power as he did, that had made it clear 5 years ago they wanted Lyra gone. The council has no authority here, Orion said. Don't they? I believe the law is quite clear. Any heir to the throne must be presented to the council within 1 year of birth for official recognition. Your children are 4 years old, Orion. That's a rather significant violation. Lyra's blood went cold. What does that mean? It means, Celeste said pleasantly, that those children are technically illegitimate, which means they have no claim to the throne, which means the council can declare them unsuitable. You can't do that. Oh, but we can, unless, of course, Orion is willing to negotiate. What do you want? Orion asked, his voice flat. The same thing I've always wanted, the throne. Celeste's smile widened. You see, there's been a movement building these past 5 years. A movement that believes the kingdom needs stronger leadership. Leadership that doesn't waste time searching for wayward mates or chasing ghosts. A coup. Such an ugly word. I prefer necessary transition. And with your heirs declared illegitimate, well, the line of succession becomes quite interesting, doesn't it? Lyra looked at Orion, saw the calculation in his eyes. He was trapped. If he fought Celeste, the council would declare the children illegitimate and potentially seize them. If he negotiated, he'd be giving ground to a coup. Either way, he lost. There's a third option, Lyra said. Both Orion and Celeste turned to look at her. I could accept the bond again. Silence. If I publicly accept the mate bond, Lyra continued, that legitimizes the children retroactively. The council can't declare them unsuitable if I'm officially Luna Queen, which makes this coup attempt, what? Treason? Celeste's smile faltered. Orion was staring at Lyra like he'd never seen her before. You rejected that bond. You can't just undo it. Actually, I can. Bond rejections are reversible if both parties consent. It's rare, painful, and requires a formal ceremony, but it's possible. Lyra met his eyes. So here's my offer. I accept the bond. I come back as Luna Queen. I legitimize our children and protect your throne from this coup. In exchange, you give me real power. Not decorative, not symbolic. Actual authority to make decisions, implement policies, protect my children. You want to be co-ruler, Orion said slowly. I want to be a partner, the thing you should have offered 5 years ago. And if I refuse? Then Celeste wins. Your children lose their birthright, and I disappear into the frontier with them, where you'll never find us again. Your choice. Orion looked at her, at Celeste, at the burning camp around them, at the future balancing on a knife's edge. Fine, he said. Partners. Celeste's expression turned murderous. You can't be serious. She's a deserter, a traitor. The court will never accept. The court will accept what I tell them to accept, Orion interrupted. And if they don't, we'll remind them who actually holds the power in this kingdom. This isn't over, Celeste hissed. No, Lyra agreed. It's just beginning. Celeste signaled to the raider leader, who signaled to his pack. The rogues immediately disengaged, melting back into the forest. Within seconds, the camp was quiet except for the crackling of flames and the moans of the wounded. You've made a terrible mistake, Celeste said to Orion. Then she looked at Lyra. Both of you. She disappeared into the darkness, leaving only the threat hanging in the air. Lyra's legs gave out. She sat down hard in the bloody dirt, her shoulders screaming, her ribs on fire, her entire body shaking with adrenaline crash. Orion crouched beside her. Are you all right? No, but I will be. She looked up at him. I need to see my children. Of course. He helped her stand, and together they walked back to where the soldiers waited with Vera, Sasha, and Dane. The children ran to Lyra the moment they saw her, and she held them tight despite the pain, breathing in their scent, reminding herself why she'd just agreed to walk back into the cage. For them. Always for them. "What happens now?" Vera asked. "Now," Orion said, looking at all of them, "we go home. All of us. And we figure out how to be a family." Lyra didn't miss the uncertainty in his voice, the same uncertainty she felt, because they just made a deal that might save the throne and protect the children. But it also meant facing the court that had wanted her gone, rebuilding a bond that had been dead for 5 years, and somehow learning to trust a man who'd never really wanted her in the first place. And all of that assumed they survived whatever Celeste was planning. The journey back to the royal city took 5 days. 5 days of traveling under heavy guard, sleeping in fortified camps, and avoiding conversation about anything that mattered. Orion kept his distance, managing his soldiers, sending runners ahead to prepare the court. The children stayed close to Lyra, watching everything with those 2 old eyes. On the 3rd night, Garrett approached Lyra while she was checking Dane's still-healing fever. "May I speak plainly, my lady?" "I'm not my lady yet, but go ahead." "What you did back there, accepting the bond, offering to return, that was either very brave or very stupid. Probably both. The court will eat you alive. They wanted you gone before, and that was when you were just an inconvenient political match. Now, you're the woman who rejected their king, hid his heirs, and forced his hand. They'll see you as a threat." "Good." Garrett blinked. "Good? Threats get respect. Decorative lunas get inspected like livestock and ignored when actual decisions need to be made." Lyra met his eyes. "I'm done being underestimated. If the court wants to come at me, let them try. I survived 5 years on the frontier with 3 children. I think I can handle some political backstabbing." "I hope you're right." Garrett paused. "For what it's worth, I think the king needs someone like you. Someone who won't just tell him what he wants to hear. What he needs is someone who will challenge him to be better than he is." "You sound like you still care about him." Did she? Lyra didn't know anymore. The bond was starting to wake up now that she'd committed to accepting it again. She could feel Orion's presence like a distant star pulling at her. But caring and bonding weren't the same thing. "I care about my children having a father who's worth respecting," she said finally. "Beyond that, we'll see." They reached the royal city on the 5th day, just as the sun was setting. Lyra had forgotten how massive it was, walls that stretched toward the sky, towers that gleamed gold, streets that could fit entire frontier settlements. The children pressed close to her, overwhelmed. "It's so big," Sasha whispered. "Stay together," Lyra said, "and don't let anyone separate us." The gates opened and they entered to crowds. Word had spread. The lost Luna returning with royal heirs, the Alpha King's children who'd been hidden for years. People lined the streets, staring, whispering, judging. Lyra lifted her chin and looked straight ahead. She was wearing borrowed clothes that didn't fit, her shoulder was still wrapped, and she probably looked like exactly what she was. A frontier wolf who'd survived by her teeth and claws. Let them stare. The royal palace loomed ahead, all marble and gold and power. Lyra remembered walking these halls 5 years ago, feeling small and lost and utterly out of place. She didn't feel small anymore. Orion dismounted at the main entrance, then offered his hand to help Lyra down. She hesitated. Accepting help meant showing weakness, but then decided this was a battle not worth fighting. She took his hand. The council was waiting inside. 12 wolves in ceremonial robes, their faces ranging from shocked to hostile to calculating. And at their center, looking smug despite her earlier defeat, stood Celeste. "Your Majesty," the head counselor said, his voice dripping with disapproval. "We were not informed you were bringing her." "Her name is Lyra," Orion said coldly, "and she is your Luna Queen. Show respect." "With all due respect, sire, she rejected that title 5 years ago. And I'm accepting it now," Lyra interrupted. "Unless the council has an objection?" The counselors exchanged looks. This was the moment. If they pushed back hard enough, they could derail everything. Then Vera stepped forward. She was tiny compared to the adults, barely reaching their waists, but when she lifted her eyes, those impossible golden eyes, the room went silent. "I'm Vera," she said clearly. "These are my siblings, Sasha and Dane. We're the king's children, And that's our mother. If you have a problem with any of that, you'll have to go through all of us. 4 years old and already commanding a room, Lyra had never been more proud. The head counselor cleared his throat. The children will need to be verified. They're mine, Orion said flatly. I don't need the council's permission to claim my own children. Nevertheless, protocol requires—
Protocol, a new voice said from the back of the hall, can be flexible when circumstances demand it. An elderly wolf stepped forward, leaning on a carved staff. Lyra recognized her, Elder Mara, one of the few counselors who'd shown her any kindness during her first brief time at court. These children carry alpha potential, Mara continued. That much is obvious to anyone with eyes. Rejecting them over a technicality would be short-sighted. The kingdom needs strong heirs. We have them. Perhaps we should be grateful rather than combative. A few counselors nodded. Others still looked hostile, but the tide was shifting. Celeste, however, wasn't done. And what of the Luna herself? She abandoned her post, her duty. I rejected a bond that was based on lies, Lyra said, her voice cutting across Celeste's. I was told I'd be a partner. I was treated like property. When I realized the truth, I left rather than spend my life as decoration. That's not abandonment, that's self-preservation. Self-preservation at the kingdom's expense. At what expense? The kingdom survived just fine without me. It'll survive with me too. The difference is, now you have heirs. Now you have succession secured. Now you have what you wanted all along. Lyra stepped closer to Celeste. So let's be clear about what this is really about. You don't care about protocol or duty. You care about power. And you're afraid that if I succeed as Luna Queen, it'll expose how unnecessary you are. Celeste's eyes flashed. You have no idea what you're walking into. You're right, I don't. But I've survived worse than court politics. I think I'll manage. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Then Orion moved to stand beside Lyra, a unified front. The bond acceptance ceremony will take place in 3 days, he announced. The council will attend and witness. Until then, Lyra and the children will be housed in the royal quarters under my protection. Any attempts to interfere will be considered treason. Are we clear? Silence. Then, reluctantly nods. They'd won. For now. But as Lyra followed Orion through the palace corridors toward the royal quarters, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the opening move in a much longer game. The quarters they assigned her were larger than any frontier settlement she'd lived in. Ornate furniture, silk curtains, a bed big enough for 10 people. The children explored cautiously, touching things like they might break. Is this where we live now? Dane asked. For now, Lyra said. I don't like it. It's too shiny. Yeah, Lyra agreed, looking around at the opulence. It is. A knock on the door, Orion entered without waiting for permission. His palace, his rules. The children need to be examined by the royal physicians, he said. Standard procedure for heirs. No. Lyra, I said no. I'm not letting strangers poke and prod my children like they're experiments. If you want them examined, you do it yourself. You're their father. Figure it out. Orion looked at her for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, he nodded. Fair enough. I'll arrange for someone you can meet first. Someone who'll explain everything before they do anything. Thank you. Another silence. Neither of them seemed to know what to say. The ceremony in 3 days, Orion finally said. It's going to hurt. Bond acceptance after rejection. It's like regrowing a limb that's been severed. I know. And once it's done, there's no taking it back. We'll be bound, permanently. I know that too. Do you? He stepped closer. Because I need to know this is real. That you're not just doing this to protect the children and you'll run again the moment you find an opening. Lyra looked up at him. At this man she'd once rejected, who she was now choosing to bind herself to. Not out of love or even like, but out of necessity, and maybe, somewhere deep down, the hope that they could build something better than what they'd had. I won't run, she said, but I won't be a cage either. I'm doing this my way, Orion. If you can't handle that, say so now. I can handle it. Then we have a deal. He left, and Lyra was alone with her children in a palace that felt more like a prison than the wilderness ever had. That night, unable to sleep, she stood on the balcony and looked out over the city. Somewhere out there, Celeste was planning. The council was scheming,
and in 3 days Lyra would bind herself to a life she'd once fled. But her children were safe, fed, warm, protected by walls and guards and power. That had to be enough. It had to be. Because she'd just gambled everything on a man who'd never really wanted her, and a court that actively hated her. And if she was wrong, if this didn't work, there would be no running this time, only consequences. The first attempt on her life came on the second day. Lyra was walking the palace gardens with Vera, letting her daughter explore the ornate hedges and fountains while Sasha and Dane napped under guard supervision. She'd been careful, kept to public areas, stayed visible, made sure guards were always within shouting distance. But apparently, that wasn't enough. The assassin came from above, dropping from a tree branch with a blade aimed at Lyra's throat. Professional, silent. Would have worked on anyone who hadn't spent 5 years surviving the frontier. Lyra twisted, felt the blade slice through her sleeve instead of her jugular, and drove her elbow into the assassin's face. Bone crunched. The assassin, a woman, slight build, expensive gear, stumbled back. "Vera, run!" Lyra shouted. But Vera didn't run. The 4-year-old did something that stopped both Lyra and the assassin cold. She growled. Not a child's growl. A real wolf growl. Deep and resonant and utterly wrong coming from someone so small. Her eyes flashed gold and the air around her seemed to shimmer with heat. The assassin actually took a step back, survival instinct overriding training. Then palace guards swarmed the garden, drawn by the commotion. The assassin bolted, disappearing over the wall before anyone could grab her. The guards gave chase, but Lyra knew they wouldn't catch her. Professionals always had escape routes. "Are you hurt?" one of the guards asked Lyra. "I'm fine." She crouched beside Vera, whose eyes had returned to normal. "Are you okay, baby?" "I scared her," Vera said, sounding confused. "I didn't mean to. I just got really angry and something happened." Something had definitely happened. Lyra had felt it, a pulse of raw power, untrained and instinctive, but unmistakably alpha energy. From a 4-year-old. No wonder people wanted these children. Within an hour, the entire palace knew about the attempt. Orion arrived at Lyra's quarters, looking furious, Garrett right behind him. "We're increasing your security," Orion said without preamble. "Guards inside and outside your rooms, no more walks without a full escort. So I'm a prisoner. You're protected. There's a difference. Not when someone just tried to kill you." Orion's voice was tight, controlled, but Lyra could feel his anger through the bond that was slowly rekindling. "This is exactly what I was afraid of. Coming back here, exposing yourself and the children, saved your throne," Lyra finished. "Or did you forget about Celeste's coup already?" "I haven't forgotten anything, including the fact that you rejected this bond once because you felt trapped. Now you're even more trapped, and someone wants you dead. How is this better?" Lyra looked at her children, who were watching the argument with wide eyes. "Because they're alive and safe. That's how." Orion rubbed his face, exhaustion showing through the cracks. "The ceremony is tomorrow. Once the bond is complete, you'll have official protection as Luna Queen. Until then, I'll be careful, but I won't be caged. Lyra, I survived 5 years without your protection, Orion. I think I can handle 2 more days." He left, still angry, and Lyra tried to ignore the guilt gnawing at her. He was trying to help. She knew that. But accepting help meant acknowledging she needed it, and that was a vulnerability she wasn't ready to show. That night, she couldn't sleep. Kept replaying the attack, the assassin's blade. How close it had come. How Vera had reacted with power she shouldn't possess yet. The children were growing stronger faster than normal, their alpha potential accelerating in ways Lyra didn't understand. They needed training, real training, not just survival skills, but control. A soft knock on her door. Lyra grabbed her knife, always within reach, and opened it to find Elder Mara standing there. "May I come in?" the older woman asked. Lyra hesitated, then stepped aside. Mara settled into a chair with a sigh. "That was quite an incident today. The assassin was skilled. You know who sent her?" "I have suspicions, but proving them is another matter." Mara studied Lyra. "How are you holding up?" "I'm fine." "You're lying, but that's understandable." Mara pulled a small pouch from her robes. "This is a blend of herbs. They'll help with the pain tomorrow. The bond acceptance ceremony is excruciating when there's been a rejection. Your body will fight it even as your mind accepts it." Lyra took the pouch. Why are you helping me? Because you remind me of myself 40 years ago. I was a frontier wolf too, brought to court through an arranged bond. The nobility looked down on me, called me crude and unrefined. But I survived by being smarter than they expected and refusing to play by their rules. And now you're an elder. Now I'm an elder who remembers what it's like to be underestimated. Mara stood. The court thinks you're weak because you ran. They think you'll run again. Prove them wrong, and you'll have more power than any crown could give you. After she left, Lyra stared at the herb pouch for a long time. Then she tucked it away and tried once again to sleep. The ceremony took place at noon in the Great Hall, with the entire court assembled to witness. Lyra wore ceremonial robes that felt like they weighed 100 pounds, her hair styled in ways that made her scalp hurt. The children sat in the front row between Garrett and Elder Mara, dressed in formal clothes that made them look even smaller. Orion stood at the center of the dais, also in ceremonial attire, looking every inch the Alpha King. When their eyes met across the hall, Lyra felt the damaged bond pulse weakly between them. The High Priestess, an ancient wolf whose clouded eyes somehow saw everything, began the ritual. We gather to witness the rejoining of what was severed, she intoned. A bond rejected may be accepted anew, but only through mutual consent and shared pain. The rejected must speak first. All eyes turned to Lyra. She stepped forward, her legs steadier than she felt. 5 years ago, I rejected this bond because I was afraid. Afraid of losing myself, of becoming invisible, of living a life that wasn't mine. I stand here today not because that fear is gone, but because I've learned that some things are worth being afraid for. She looked at her children. I accept this bond, not as surrender, but as choice. The hall was silent. Even the skeptics seemed caught off guard by her honesty. The Alpha must respond, the priestess said. Orion's voice was rough when he spoke. 5 years ago, I failed you. I offered you a title, but not a partnership. Status, but not respect. I didn't see you as an equal because I'd never been taught to see anyone that way. I'm sorry for that. He met her eyes. I accept you as my Luna, as my partner, and I swear before this court that I will never ask you to be less than you are. Something in Lyra's chest cracked open. Not love, they weren't there yet, but possibility. Then let the bond be remade, the priestess said. She drew a ceremonial blade, silver etched with ancient symbols, and made a cut across Lyra's palm. Then Orion's. Blood welled up, bright and hot. The priestess pressed their hands together, binding them with silk. Speak the words, she commanded. Together, they recited the ancient vow. Words in a language older than the kingdom, older than memory. As they spoke, the bond between them flared to life. And Lyra understood what Mara had meant about pain. It felt like her chest was being ripped open and rewired all at once. Every nerve screamed. The bond that had withered to almost nothing suddenly exploded back into existence, raw and overwhelming, connecting her to Orion in ways she'd forgotten were possible. His emotions crashed into hers, anger, relief, hope, fear, all tangled together. And hers flooded into him, determination, exhaustion, fierce protectiveness, reluctant trust. It was too much, too intense. Lyra's knees buckled. Orion caught her, his own face pale with pain, but his grip steady. I've got you, he murmured. Stay with me. The priestess was still chanting, the ceremony not yet complete. Blood and magic and ancient power swirling around them, sealing what had been broken. When it finally ended, Lyra collapsed against Orion's chest, gasping. The hall erupted in applause, some genuine, some obligatory, but she barely heard it over the roar of the bond settling into place. It's done, Orion said quietly. You're officially Luna Queen now. Officially trapped, you mean? He pulled back to look at her, and there was something almost like amusement in his eyes. You're going to be a nightmare for the court, aren't you? Absolutely. The feast afterward was excruciating. Hours of sitting at the high table, smiling at nobles who clearly hated her, making polite conversation while her hand throbbed and the bond pulsed with unfamiliar sensations. Celeste sat 3 seats down, her expression carefully neutral, but Lyra could feel the hatred radiating off her. You're doing well, Orion murmured during a lull. I'm faking it. That's half of ruling. The other half is knowing when to stop faking. An interesting perspective from someone who'd seemed to have it all figured out. When the feast finally ended, Lyra escaped to her quarters and found her children already asleep, exhausted from the day. She sat on the edge of Vera's bed, watching her daughter's chest rise and fall. "You can't watch them all night," a voice said from the doorway. Orion. Of course. The bond made it hard for them to be separated for long now. She could feel him even through walls. Someone has to. That's what the guards are for. Guards didn't stop that assassin. Orion stepped into the room, careful not to wake the children. No, but you did. You're a good mother, Lyra. Better than I gave you credit for. Thanks. I think. He sat in the chair across from her, and for a moment they just existed in the same space without arguing. It was almost peaceful. What happens now? Lyra asked. With Celeste and the council? Now we consolidate power. Show them you're not going anywhere, that the children are legitimate heirs, that opposing us is a losing strategy. How? The council meets weekly to discuss kingdom business. Traditionally, the Luna Queen doesn't attend. She handles domestic matters separately, but there's no actual law preventing it. Lyra saw where he was going. You want me to crash their meeting? I want you to claim your seat at the table. Make them acknowledge you as an equal voice in governance. They'll hate that. They already hate you. Might as well give them a good reason. The first council meeting Lyra attended was exactly as hostile as she expected. She walked into the chamber, a circular room with 12 seats for counselors, 1 for the king, and historically, none for the Luna Queen, and claimed the empty seat beside Orion. The head counselor, a pompous wolf named Aldrich, actually sputtered. This is highly irregular. Is there a law against it? Lyra asked. Well, no, but tradition also said the Luna Queen should be decorative and silent. I'm changing that tradition. Celeste, seated across from them, smiled coldly. And what exactly do you plan to contribute to these discussions? You have no training in governance, no understanding of the kingdom's needs. I have 5 years of survival experience in the harshest territories on the continent. I've negotiated with raiders, managed resources in scarcity, and kept myself and 3 children alive when everyone expected us to die. If that's not governance training, I don't know what is. A few counselors actually looked impressed. Others just looked angry. Let her stay, Elder Mara said. I'm curious to see what fresh perspective she brings. The meeting proceeded, covering everything from trade negotiations to border disputes. Lyra stayed quiet at first, listening, learning the dynamics. But when they reached a discussion about frontier management, she spoke up. The proposal to increase military presence in the frontier territories is wasteful, she said. Aldrich's eyebrows rose. Wasteful? We're trying to establish order. You're trying to control something that doesn't want to be controlled. Frontier wolves reject authority. That's why they're there. Send more soldiers, and you'll just create more resistance. What you need is trade partnerships. Give them economic incentive to cooperate instead of forcing submission. That's naive, Celeste said. The frontier respects strength, not commerce. The frontier respects survival, and trade is survival. Lyra leaned forward. I lived there. I know how it works. Your military approach will cost more in blood and resources than it could possibly gain. Silence. Then Orion spoke. She's right. We've been approaching the frontier problem the wrong way. Lyra, work with the trade minister. Draft a proposal for economic partnerships. Present it at the next meeting. Aldrich looked like he wanted to object, but Orion's tone made it clear this wasn't a discussion. The meeting ended with Lyra having her first official responsibility. Small, but it was a start. Over the next 2 weeks, she threw herself into work. Studied trade routes, talked to frontier traders who came to the capital, drew on her own experience to craft a proposal that actually made sense. The trade minister, a pragmatic wolf named Helena, who cared more about results than politics, was surprisingly helpful. You're good at this, Helena said during one of their planning sessions. Have you considered taking on more administrative duties? Like what? Education reform, healthcare in the outer territories, infrastructure development? There's a lot of kingdom business that gets ignored because the council is too focused on military and political matters. Lyra had never thought of herself as an administrator, but the more she learned, the more she saw opportunities to actually help people instead of just surviving. Meanwhile, her relationship with Orion was evolving in strange ways. The bond forced them to communicate, literally. Their emotions bled into each other, making it impossible to hide feelings. When Lyra was frustrated with council politics, Orion felt it. When he was exhausted from command decisions, she knew. It was invasive and intimate and nothing like what she'd expected. "Does it ever get less overwhelming?" she asked one night when they were both too restless to sleep.
The bond? Eventually. Right now it's still new, still raw. Give it time. I don't know if I have time. Between the council, the children, and trying not to get assassinated again, there hasn't been another attempt. That just means they're planning something bigger. Orion moved closer, and the bond pulsed with something that might have been concern. I won't let anything happen to you. I don't need you to protect me. I need you to trust me to protect myself.
I do trust you. That's not the issue.
Then what is? He was quiet for a moment. I'm afraid of failing you again, of making the same mistakes I made 5 years ago. The honesty caught her off guard. Then don't make them. Treat me like a partner, not a problem to solve. I'm trying. I know. It wasn't love, but it was something, maybe even something better. Mutual respect earned through conflict instead of assumed through ceremony.
The breakthrough came during her third council meeting. Lyra presented her frontier trade proposal, complete with detailed resource allocations and projected outcomes. She'd rehearsed it a dozen times with Helena, anticipated every objection. But Celeste struck at an angle she hadn't expected. "This proposal requires significant initial investment," Celeste said smoothly. "Resources we don't currently have, given our military commitments. Unless, of course, the Luna Queen is suggesting we reduce our defenses to fund her pet project." A trap. Agree. And she'd looked naive about security. Disagree, and her proposal died. Lyra smiled. "Actually, I'm suggesting we redirect funds currently allocated to the fortress expansion in the northern marches. That project is 3 years behind schedule, 20% over budget, and according to the engineering reports I reviewed, built on unstable ground. It's a money pit. Take those funds, invest them in frontier trade, and you'll see returns within 2 years. Dead silence. Aldrich cleared his throat. "Those engineering reports are classified. Are they? Because I found them in the public archives, poorly filed but accessible." She'd spent days combing through records, looking for leverage. "Unless there's a reason they should be classified? Something the council doesn't want the kingdom to know about cost overruns and construction failures?" Several councilors suddenly looked very uncomfortable. The fortress project was a favorite of Aldrich's faction, meaning it was probably also a source of embezzlement. Orion's approval flooded through the bond. He'd seen what she was doing. "The Luna Queen makes a valid point," he said. "I'm ordering a full audit of the fortress project. If there are indeed structural issues, we'll redirect those funds as she suggests. Pending the audit results, her proposal is approved for implementation." Celeste's expression could have frozen fire, but she couldn't object without looking like she opposed economic development. Lyra had won. After the meeting, Elder Mara pulled her aside. "That was well played. You've made an enemy of Aldrich now, though." "I already had plenty of enemies." "True, but now you've also made allies. The counselors who benefit from frontier trade will support you. Use that." Lyra was learning that court politics was just another kind of survival. Different weapons, same fundamental rules. Identify threats, build alliances, never show weakness. That night, Orion came to her quarters. The audit already found irregularities in the fortress accounts. Aldrich's going to be investigated. "Good. You've been Luna Queen for 3 weeks, and you've already triggered a corruption investigation. The court doesn't know what to do with you." "That's the idea." He laughed, actually laughed, and the sound was so unexpected that Lyra found herself smiling too. "You're exactly what this kingdom needs," he said. "Someone who doesn't give a damn about tradition when it gets in the way of doing what's right." "Is that your way of saying I'm growing on you?" "Maybe." The bond hummed between them, warm and alive. Not love yet, but definitely not hate anymore. Progress. The children were adapting too, in their own ways. Vera had taken to following Lyra to meetings, sitting quietly in the corner and observing everything with those sharp golden eyes. Sasha was driving the combat instructors crazy by being simultaneously gifted and completely undisciplined. And Dane had befriended the palace librarian, spending hours reading everything he could find about Alpha history.
They're going to be formidable, Garrett observed one afternoon while watching Sasha spar with a guard twice her size. They already are, Lyra said. That's what scares people. Including you? Especially me. I know what they're capable of. I've seen it. They have power they don't understand yet, and when they do, they'll change everything, Garrett finished. The question is whether the kingdom will accept that change or try to suppress it. Lyra watched her daughter disarm a trained warrior with a move she'd invented on the spot. They can try to suppress it. Won't work, though. Spoken like a true mother. The assassination attempt that had been brewing finally came during a state dinner. Poison in the wine, classic, predictable, almost insulting in its lack of creativity. But it wasn't aimed at Lyra. It was aimed at Vera. The child had been allowed to attend as part of her training in court etiquette. She'd been seated at the children's table with other noble offspring, carefully supervised. Or so they thought. Lyra didn't know what made her look over at that exact moment. The bond, maybe, or instinct, or just luck. But she saw Vera reaching for her wine glass, saw the slight discoloration in the liquid, saw the servant who'd poured it already backing toward the exit. She was moving before conscious thought, crossing the hall in seconds, knocking the glass from Vera's hand. It shattered on the floor, wine spreading like blood. The hall went silent. That wine is poisoned, Lyra said clearly. Someone check. A royal physician hurried over, tested the spilled wine, and went pale. Hemlock. Enough to kill a child instantly. Chaos erupted. Guards seized the fleeing servant, who immediately confessed under pressure. He'd been paid by someone he'd never met. Given the poison and instructions through a dead drop. Untraceable. Professional. But Lyra knew who was behind it. Everyone did. Celeste sat at the high table, her expression carefully shocked, but her scent betrayed her. Fear mixed with satisfaction. She'd expected this to work. Orion stood, his voice cutting through the noise. Attempted murder of a royal heir is treason. The servant will be questioned, and I'm ordering protective details tripled for all 3 children. That's not enough, Lyra said. Everyone turned to look at her. Tripling guards doesn't address the real problem. Someone in this court, someone with access and resources wants my children dead. Until we root them out, more attempts will follow. And what do you suggest? Aldrich asked. Lyra looked directly at Celeste. A formal challenge. Anyone who questions the legitimacy of my children or my position as Luna Queen can challenge me directly. Trial by combat. Winner takes all. The hall exploded with shocked murmurs. That's barbaric, Celeste said, but her voice wavered. It's traditional, Lyra countered. Alpha law. You want my position? Prove you're strong enough to take it. Orion's shock ricocheted through the bond, but he didn't contradict her. I second the challenge, Elder Mara said, standing. Let anyone who doubts the Luna Queen's strength face her directly. It's been too long since this court remembered that power isn't just politics, it's also prowess. Other voices joined in. The warrior faction of the court, always hungry for spectacle, loved the idea. The political faction looked horrified. And Celeste looked trapped, because if she refused, she'd look weak. But if she accepted, she'd have to actually fight Lyra. And for all her political skill, Celeste wasn't a fighter. I accept, Celeste finally said. 1 week from today. We'll see who's worthy of standing beside the king. Lyra smiled. We will indeed. As the dinner dissolved into excited chatter about the upcoming challenge, Orion pulled Lyra aside. Are you insane? He demanded. Celeste will hire champions. She doesn't have to fight you herself. She can send proxies. I know. But this gets everything into the open, forces her to commit. And when I win, if you win, when I win, her entire faction loses credibility. No more shadow games, no more poison, just direct confrontation. You've been Luna Queen for less than a month. You don't have to prove yourself this way. Lyra met his eyes. Yes, I do, not to you or the court, to myself. I need to know I can face this head on instead of running. The bond carried her certainty, her determination, and underneath it, the fear she wouldn't admit aloud. Orion's expression softened. Then I'll train with you, every day until the challenge. If you're going to do this, you're going to win. And for the first time since accepting the bond, Lyra felt like they were actually partners. The week before the challenge was brutal. Orion trained her personally, pushing her harder than any instructor ever had. He didn't hold back, didn't coddle, treated her like a warrior instead of someone fragile. She loved it. Again, he barked after she missed a parry. Lyra lunged faster this time and actually managed to tag his shoulder. Better. But Celeste's champion won't be practicing with you. They'll be trying to kill you. Faster.
They went again and again, until Lyra's muscles screamed and her lungs burned and she couldn't tell if the sweat in her eyes was hers or his.
Enough, Orion finally said. You're ready. I don't feel ready. You never will, that's the point. He tossed her a water skin. Confidence in combat comes from surviving it, not from feeling prepared.
The night before the challenge, Lyra couldn't sleep. She stood on her balcony, watching the moon, and felt Orion's approach through the bond before he spoke. Having second thoughts? He asked. Hundreds, but I'm still doing it. Why? She considered the question. Because I'm tired of people thinking they can hurt my family without consequences. Because I want the court to see me as something other than the runaway Luna. Because... She paused. Because I need to prove to myself that I'm more than just a survivor, that I can actually win. Orion stood beside her, close but not touching. You've already won. You came back when you could have stayed hidden. You faced the court when you could have run. You've challenged the entire power structure in 3 weeks. That's not surviving, Lyra. That's conquering. The words settled into her chest, warm and solid. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For seeing me. Finally. The challenge took place in the ceremonial arena, with half the kingdom in attendance. Lyra walked onto the sand wearing light armor, carrying a blade she'd trained with all week. Across from her stood Celeste and her 3 champions. The crowd gasped. 3 against 1? Lyra called out. Seems excessive. You challenge my right to question you, Celeste replied. I'm answering with the full force of my position. If you're truly worthy, you'll overcome. The referee, Elder Mara, looked at Lyra. Do you accept these terms? Every instinct screamed to refuse. 3 professional warriors against her? Suicide. But refusing meant backing down, meant showing weakness. Lyra looked up at the royal box where Orion sat with their children. Through the bond, she felt his confidence in her. I accept, she said. The champions charged. And Lyra stopped thinking like a politician and started fighting like the frontier wolf she'd always been. The first champion was massive, pure muscle and aggression, the kind of fighter who relied on overwhelming force. He came at Lyra like a battering ram, expecting her to dodge or retreat. She went low instead, sliding under his swing and hamstringing him as she passed. He howled and went down on one knee. Lyra didn't wait, drove her blade into the gap between his armor plates at the shoulder. Not a killing blow, but enough to take him out of the fight. 1 down. The second and third champions were smarter. They circled her, coordinating, trying to divide her attention. The woman was fast, twin daggers flashing. The man was methodical, using a spear to keep distance. Lyra couldn't beat them with strength or speed, but she'd spent 5 years learning to fight dirty. She grabbed a handful of sand and threw it in the woman's face. The champion stumbled, blinded, and Lyra used that second to close distance with the spear wielder. Got inside his reach where the long weapon was useless, slammed her pommel into his throat. He dropped, gasping. 2 down. The woman had recovered, murder in her eyes, daggers spinning. She was good, really good. Lyra barely parried the first strike, felt the second blade slice across her ribs. Pain bloomed hot and immediate, but pain was familiar. Pain was just information. Lyra let the woman overextend on her next attack, then trapped her arm and drove her knee into the champion's elbow. Something snapped. The woman screamed, her dagger clattering to the sand. 3 down. Lyra stood in the center of the arena, bleeding, breathing hard but standing. The crowd was absolutely silent. Then someone started clapping, slow, deliberate. Others joined in. Within seconds, the entire arena was roaring. Lyra looked up at Celeste, who sat frozen in her seat, face pale. Do you have more champions? Lyra called out. Or are we done? Celeste said nothing. The challenge is satisfied, Elder Mara declared, her voice carrying across the arena. Luna Queen Lyra has proven her worth. Does anyone else wish to question her legitimacy? Silence. Not even Celeste's closest allies spoke up. Then this matter is settled. Mara raised her staff. All hail Luna Queen Lyra, proven in combat, bound by blood, protector of the realm. The crowd took up the chant, and Lyra felt the weight of it settle over her shoulders. Not a burden this time. Something earned. She walked off the sand to where Orion waited at the arena entrance. He pulled her into his arms without hesitation, and through the bond she felt his pride, his relief, his something else she couldn't quite name yet. "You're insane," he murmured into her hair. "Brilliant, terrifying, but completely insane." "I know. Don't ever do that again." "Can't promise that." He laughed and kissed her forehead, and Lyra realized this was the first time he'd done that, touched her with affection instead of duty. The children mobbed her next, all three talking over each other. "Mama, you were amazing." Sasha practically vibrated with excitement. "You used the sand trick I suggested," Vera said, sounding proud. "Are you hurt?" Dane asked, eyeing the blood on her side. "Nothing serious. I'm okay. I promise." But she let the royal physicians check her anyway, get her stitched up properly. The wound wasn't deep, would heal clean. She'd had worse. That night there was a celebration. Not a formal feast, Lyra had banned those after the poisoning attempt, but a gathering in the palace gardens. Informal, relaxed, actually enjoyable. Wolves from all factions attended, and for the first time Lyra felt like maybe she belonged here. Elder Mara found her near the fountain. "You've shifted the power balance today. The warrior faction will support you now, and the traditionalists can't openly oppose you without looking weak." "What about Celeste?" "Celeste is wounded but not defeated. She'll regroup, find another angle, but she'll have to be more careful now." Lyra sipped her wine. She'd watched it being poured herself, paranoid but practical. "I didn't come back here to play political games forever." "What did you come back for?" "To protect my children, to give them a life better than running and hiding." Lyra watched Vera teaching Sasha and Dane some complicated hand game across the garden. "And maybe to prove that I could be more than what people expected." "You've already done that. The question is what you'll do with it." Over the following weeks, Lyra discovered that winning a challenge was just the beginning. She threw herself into actual governance, working with Helena on frontier trade, collaborating with the education minister to reform how alpha potential was trained, even sitting in on military strategy sessions where she used her knowledge of frontier terrain to improve border security. Some counselors resented her involvement. Others grudgingly admitted she brought valuable perspective. A few, like Elder Mara and Helena, became genuine allies. And Orion? Orion was figuring out how to be her partner instead of her king. "You're thinking too defensively," Lyra said during one strategy session, pointing at the map. "The raiders aren't trying to hold territory. They're disrupting supply lines. Put your forces here and here. Protect the roads, not the settlements." The general frowned. "That leaves the settlements vulnerable. The settlements can defend themselves. They've been doing it for years. What they can't do is move goods safely, fix the logistics problem, and the raids become pointless." Orion studied the map, then nodded. "She's right. Redeploy as she suggests." After the meeting, he caught up to her in the hallway. "Where did you learn military strategy?" "I didn't. I learned how to survive when people were trying to kill me. Turns out that translates." "You keep surprising me." "Good. Keeps you on your toes." The bond between them had settled into something warm and constant. Not love. They were both too damaged for that to come easy, but genuine partnership. They argued about policy, challenged each other's assumptions, and occasionally drove each other crazy. But they also laughed together, worked together, and were building something that felt real. One night, after a particularly exhausting council session, they found themselves alone on a balcony overlooking the city. "Do you regret it?" Orion asked quietly. "Coming back?" Lyra considered. "I regret that it took my children being in danger for it to happen. But the actual coming back, no. I'm doing things here I could never have done in the frontier, making changes that actually help people." "You've reformed more in 2 months than most Lunas do in decades." "Most Lunas weren't given real power. You gave me that. Why?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because I realized what I lost when you left the first time. Not just a political alliance, but someone who challenged me to be better. I don't want to make that mistake again." "So this is pragmatic?" "This is me learning from my failures." He turned to face her. 5 years ago, I offered you a title. Today, I'm offering you partnership, real partnership, equal say in how this kingdom runs. You already gave me that. Officially, yes, but I mean it personally too. I'm not your king, Lyra. I'm your mate, and I want to figure out what that actually means. Something in Lyra's chest loosened. I'd like that too. He kissed her then, properly, and it felt like a beginning instead of an obligation. But peace never lasted long in the royal court. The coup attempt came 3 months after the challenge. Celeste had been quiet, building alliances in the shadows, and Lyra had known something was coming. She just hadn't expected it to be so bold. It started with a vote. The council convened for what should have been a routine session on tax policy, but Celeste arrived with a petition signed by half the noble houses in the kingdom. We're calling for a vote of no confidence, she announced, in both the Alpha King and his Luna Queen. The chamber erupted. On what grounds? Orion demanded. Incompetent leadership, dangerous reforms, and most critically, harboring illegitimate heirs with dangerous abilities that threaten the stability of the realm. We've been through this, Lyra said coldly. The children were legitimized through bond acceptance. Were they? Because according to the ancient laws Celeste has researched, bond acceptance doesn't retroactively legitimize children if the rejection was made in bad faith. Elder Mara stood. That's a misinterpretation of... It's a valid legal interpretation, Celeste interrupted. And it's supported by historical precedent. I have documentation. She placed a stack of scrolls on the table. 3 similar cases from the past 2 centuries. In each one, the children were declared illegitimate despite later bond acceptance. Lyra's blood went cold. If the children were declared illegitimate, they'd have no protection, no claim to anything. They'd be targets again. Those cases are completely different circumstances, Orion argued. Are they? Or is that just what you want to believe? Celeste looked around the room. The kingdom needs stability. It needs heirs without question marks. And it needs leadership that puts the realm above personal attachments. You're talking about deposing us, Lyra said flatly. I'm talking about what's best for the kingdom. You've made changes, yes, some even beneficial, but you're also chaos, rejected bonds, hidden children, constant conflict. This realm deserves better. Several counselors nodded, not a majority, but enough to be dangerous. Then let's vote, Orion said. Now, let the council decide if we're fit to lead. Your Majesty, perhaps we should delay Garrett started. No delays. If our leadership is in question, we address it immediately. Orion looked at Lyra, and through the bond she felt his certainty. They'd face this together. The vote was called. 1 by 1, counselors declared their positions. 4 voted for deposition. 4 voted for confidence. 4 abstained, waiting to see which way the wind blew. It came down to Elder Mara. The elderly wolf stood slowly, her clouded eyes somehow seeing everything. I've served this kingdom for 40 years. I've seen 5 Alpha Kings and 7 Luna Queens. And I can say without hesitation that what we have now, messy, argumentative, unconventional as it is the strongest leadership this realm has seen in generations. She paused, letting that sink in. But that's not why I'm voting confidence. I'm voting confidence because these 2 have done something none of their predecessors managed. They've shown us that power doesn't have to mean control, that strength includes admitting mistakes, that leadership is about growth, not perfection. She looked at Celeste. You offer stability through suppression. They offer stability through adaptation. I know which kingdom I want to live in. The vote stands at 5 for confidence, the vote keeper announced. 4 for deposition. 4 abstentions. The motion fails. Leadership is maintained. Celeste's expression didn't change, but her scent spiked with fury. This isn't over, she said quietly. Yes, Lyra replied. It is. Because Lyra had learned something crucial during her months at court. Celeste's power came from shadows and manipulation. Drag everything into the light, and she had nothing. I'm calling for a public forum, Lyra announced. Open to all citizens, not just nobility. Let them hear both sides. Your concerns about our leadership and our vision for the kingdom. Let them decide who they want leading them. The common wolves have no say in succession. They will now. I'm proposing a reform. Major leadership decisions require not just council approval, but public consensus.
Real consensus, measured through forms and polling across all territories.
The council exploded with objections, but Lyra talked over them. You want to challenge our legitimacy? Fine. But do it in front of the people we're actually serving, not just the nobles who want to maintain their power base. Orion stood beside her. I support this reform. The Luna Queen is right. We serve the kingdom, not just the court. It took 3 weeks to organize the public forum. 3 weeks of Celeste trying to sabotage it, of nobles complaining about mob rule, of Lyra and Orion traveling to every major city to make their case directly to the people. And everywhere they went, they brought Vera, Sasha, and Dane. Let people see the children with the golden eyes. Let them witness the next generation of leaders. Let them decide for themselves if these heirs were dangerous or exactly what the kingdom needed. The forum itself was held in the capital's central square, with thousands of citizens in attendance. Celeste spoke first, laying out her case with practiced eloquence. They ask you to embrace chaos, she said, to accept children whose very existence breaks tradition, to follow leaders who put personal choices above kingdom needs. Is that what you want? Instability? Uncertainty? It was a good speech. Compelling. Safe. Then Lyra stood. She didn't have notes, didn't have practiced phrases, just her truth. 5 years ago, I ran because I felt trapped in a life that wasn't mine. I chose freedom over status, uncertainty over a cage, and I survived. I raised 3 children in the harshest territories on this continent, and we made it because we adapted. Because we learned that survival isn't about avoiding change, it's about embracing it. She gestured to Vera, Sasha, and Dane, who stood nearby. These children are different. Yes, they have abilities we don't fully understand yet. But different doesn't mean dangerous. It means potential. And this kingdom can either fear that potential or nurture it. The choice is yours. She took a breath. I'm not going to promise you perfect leadership. I make mistakes. I argue with the king, with the council, with tradition itself when it doesn't make sense. But I promise you this. I will never stop fighting to make this kingdom better, safer, fairer. Not just for nobles, but for everyone. Frontier wolves, city workers, farmers, traders, all of you matter. All of you deserve leadership that sees you. The square was silent. So yes, choose chaos, if that's what you want to call it. Or choose growth. Choose leadership that's learning alongside you instead of pretending to have all the answers. Choose the future instead of clinging to the past. When she finished, the square erupted. Not unanimous, some booed, some looked skeptical, but the majority cheered. Loud and sustained and real. The polling took 2 days. When the results came in, it was clear. 72% of citizens supported Lyra and Orion's leadership. Only 18% backed Celeste. The rest were undecided but leaning toward giving the current leadership more time. Celeste had lost. Publicly. Completely. She disappeared from court the next day. Rumor said she'd left the capital entirely, retreating to her family's estates. Some said she was planning another move. Others said she'd given up. Lyra didn't care. She'd won the battle that mattered, the one for public legitimacy. 6 months after the forum, the kingdom had changed in ways no one had anticipated. The frontier trade partnerships were working, bringing prosperity to regions that had been ignored for decades. Education reforms meant children from all backgrounds could train for leadership roles, not just those born to nobility. And the public forum had become a regular institution, monthly gatherings where citizens could voice concerns directly to their leaders. It wasn't perfect. There were still problems, still resistance, still wolves who hated every change Lyra implemented. But it was progress. Real, measurable progress. Lyra stood in her office. Yes, she had an actual office now, with staff and everything, reviewing proposals for healthcare expansion when Orion walked in. The northern governors are complaining again, he said. They think the reforms are happening too fast. They can complain. We're not slowing down. I told them that. They weren't happy. Good. Happy governors means we're not pushing hard enough. Orion laughed and pulled her away from her desk. You know what today is? Tuesday? It's been exactly 1 year since you came back, since we accepted the bond again. Had it really been a year? It felt like both longer and shorter than that. And? Lyra asked. And I wanted to thank you. For what? For not running. For fighting. For for showing me what real partnership looks like. He touched her face gently. For giving me a second chance I probably didn't deserve. You earned it, Lyra said. Every day you earn it by being better than you were. We're better together. Yeah, we are. He kissed her, and this time it wasn't tentative or uncertain. It was solid, real, built on a year of arguments and compromises and slowly learning to trust. When they finally pulled apart, Vera was standing in the doorway with her siblings. Are you two done being gross? She asked. We have that meeting with the youth council in 10 minutes. The youth council had been Dane's idea, giving young wolves a voice in governance, teaching them early how to participate in leadership. It was brilliant and slightly terrifying how good these kids were getting at politics. We're done, Lyra assured her. For now. They walked together to the council chamber. Lyra, Orion, and their 3 children who were already showing signs of becoming extraordinary leaders. Different from their parents, but no less capable. As they passed through the halls, wolves bowed, not out of fear or obligation, but respect, real respect. Lyra had spent 5 years running from a cage, spent another year breaking it open from the inside. And now? Now she was remaking it entirely into something that felt like home. That night, after all the meetings and decisions and never-ending responsibilities, Lyra found herself back on that balcony overlooking the city. The same place where she'd once stood wondering if coming back was a mistake. She didn't wonder anymore. Orion joined her, and they stood in comfortable silence, watching lights flicker across the kingdom they were slowly transforming. Do you ever miss it? He asked. The frontier? Sometimes. The simplicity of it. Just survival. Nothing more complicated than that. But this matters more. Out there, I was protecting 3 people. Here, I'm protecting thousands, maybe more. You've changed this kingdom, Lyra, more than you probably realize. We've changed it, she corrected, together. He pulled her close, and she let herself lean into him. They'd both come so far from those 2 wolves who'd stood in a grand hall 5 years ago, strangers bound by politics and nothing else. Now they were partners, mates, parents, leaders. Imperfect, still figuring it out, but genuine. What do you think happens next? Orion asked. More fights, more challenges, more wolves who think they know better. Lyra smiled. The usual. Looking forward to it? Weirdly, yes. Because she'd learned something crucial over the past year. Power wasn't something you took or were given. It was something you built, piece by piece, choice by choice, day by day. And the strongest power came not from control, but from the ability to adapt, to grow, to become more than what anyone expected. She'd been rejected, exiled, hunted, and nearly destroyed. And she'd come back from all of it stronger. Not because she was perfect, not because she never made mistakes, but because she refused to let anyone, including herself, define her worth by their narrow expectations. That was the lesson she wanted to teach her children. Not that they had to be the best or the strongest or the most powerful, but that they had the right to define success on their own terms. To build lives that made sense to them, regardless of what tradition dictated. Vera appeared on the balcony, Sasha and Dane trailing behind. Mama, we can't sleep, Vera said. Too much excitement from the youth council meeting? Lyra guessed. Kinda. Also, Dane won't stop reading out loud and Sasha keeps practicing combat moves in bed. She kicked me, Dane protested. It was an accident. You said, dodge this right before you did it, Orion laughed. Come on, I know a story that might help. They all settled in Lyra's sitting room, the one she'd claimed as her private space, decorated with maps of the frontier and books on governance, and a painting Sasha had made of their family that was mostly just enthusiastic splashes of color. What story? Vera asked. The story of how your mother defeated 3 champions in single combat and changed the kingdom forever, Orion said. We already know that one, Sasha complained. Then how about the story of how she survived 5 years in the frontier with 3 babies and never gave up, even when everything was terrible? That one sat at the beginning, Dane said. It is, Lyra agreed, but it gets better. Because the best stories aren't about being perfect. They're about being tough enough to keep going even when things are hard. And smart enough to know when to fight and when to negotiate, Orion added. And brave enough to choose your own path instead of the one people expect, Lyra finished. Vera looked at her with those golden eyes that saw too much. Is that what you want us to learn? To choose our own paths? That's exactly what I want you to learn. You three are going to be extraordinary, but that doesn't mean you have to do what we did or be who we are. Figure out who you want to be, and we'll support you. Even if it's weird, Sasha asked, especially if it's weird. They talked long into the night, telling stories, making each other laugh, just being a family in a way that felt earned rather than obligatory. Eventually, the children fell asleep curled up together on the couch, and Lyra covered them with a blanket. They're going to change the world, Orion said quietly. They already are. Just by existing. Just by being proof that different doesn't mean dangerous. Like their mother. Lyra looked at the man who'd once been a stranger, then an obligation, then a partner, and was now something she might actually call beloved. We did good, didn't we? We're doing good. Present tense. This isn't finished. No, but it's working. And that was enough. Not perfect, not easy, but real and earned and worth every fight. Lyra had learned that the opposite of being trapped wasn't running away. It was building something worth staying for. Something that grew and changed and adapted instead of remaining static and suffocating. She'd been rejected, and it had shattered her world. But from those pieces, she'd built something stronger, not just for herself, but for her children, her kingdom, and every wolf who'd ever been told they weren't enough. That was power. That was legacy. That was what it meant to rise from rejection to dominance, not by forcing others down, but by lifting yourself up and bringing others with you. Under the same moon that had witnessed her disappearance 5 years ago, Lyra stood in a kingdom she'd helped reshape, no longer running, no longer hiding, just leading. And finally, after everything, belonging. Not because someone gave her permission, but because she'd claimed her place and made it impossible to ignore. From broken to unstoppable. From rejected to irreplaceable. From exile to legacy. And she was just getting started.